I don't understand how you, number one, marry this person, and number two, choose to have 2 kids with them. Like, how did you get through child 1 without ever having that conversation? I don't know. Welcome to Mom Alternative, where we try to provide a sane perspective to modern motherhood and relationship struggles. Today is all about answering the question, is it the in-laws that are overbearing, or is it the husband that's weak? We'll be talking about grandparent rights, a husband who thinks that women exaggerate during childbirth, and answering the question of, is it funny if an in-law says that they're going to kidnap your child? Let's get started. Our first thread of the day is titled Grandparents' Rights. Should grandparents see their grandchildren when they want to or when the parents allow them to? My spouse thinks his parents should be able to see our daughter whenever they want to. Now, you can kind of already see from the thread that this is not really a genuine question. Like, obviously the answer is that grandparents should see the grandchildren when the parents allow them to, which is fair enough. I think that that's a very different idea and a very different concept from the idea of grandparent rights, which I guess is the question of, do grandparents have a right to their grandchildren? And I think that that's quite complicated. To some extent, I almost want to say, yeah, maybe they should. But honestly, I say that kind of it would be a little bit hypocritical of me to say so, because our son, for example, does not have equal, both sides of our family do not have equal access to our son. And that's obviously a conscious decision that we made as parents. I think fundamentally, the question of rights when it comes to grandparents, like, it's a perfect situation where the idea of privilege versus a right comes into play. So a right is something that kind of the universe owes you by virtue of your existence. You don't need to do anything to earn it. You don't need to change anything about yourself. It's like the right to life, right? You just have the right to life in theory, or at least we as a society want to guarantee that for people. And I think that with grandparents, it's very much one of those cases where it really depends a lot and very, very fundamentally on the type of relationship that you develop with your children and then as adults. And I don't think that this is something that you can back away from. So if you want, you can earn the right to engage with your grandchildren, because then, of course, if you have a great relationship with your kids, then they would never want to take their children away from you. And then the question is, at what point does that go too far? And I think quite a lot of grandparents take it too far by thinking that they have as equal right to the grandchildren as, for example, the parents do, which is obviously fundamentally wrong. Now, the problem with this framing here and what OP wants to get at is when she says, hey, my spouse thinks his parents should be able to see our daughter whenever they want to. She gives the impression that there's basically zero restriction. From her husband's side, there is not a single situation or a single circumstance in which he'd say, okay, you know what, maybe not today. And I think OP's frustration is coming more from this angle of they are guaranteed access to our kid no matter what, rather than saying, hey, I have a serious concern about allowing your parents to have access to our child because of these and these and these reasons. So, for example, abusive reasons, the way that they interact, whether they would harm the child in some kind of way, whatever it might be. Those are the types of circumstances where I would say, okay, if you are forced to cut down on your contact with your parents for whatever reason, then of course it's not really fair, and it wouldn't make any sense if you then say, all right, but I'm happy for my parents to still interact with my child. And that's a very different circumstance from, I'm just annoyed at having to deal with them all the time and we're seeing them too regularly and I don't want to do that. Now we're going to go into some of the comments here, and you'll see that OP's primary problem is really just how often they are seeing the grandparents. And under those circumstances, it's quite clear to say, you just need to get on the same page as your husband here. So I don't think that coming on the internet and writing a thread like this and then showing him hundreds of people saying, yeah, well, of course, it's, the grandparents don't have rights to your kids, is going to be the thing that really changes his opinion. If I were OP, I would say the fundamental problem that you're trying to solve is how you interact with your husband and getting on the same page, agreeing there. What's a reasonable cadence that they should, that your grandparents should visit, for example. So the very first comment says, in my opinion, when parents say grandparent, in my opinion, when parents say grandparents are not entitled to seeing their grandchildren, I think you should definitely be reasonable though. If they live close and want to visit daily, that's a no. If they're looking at once a month or once a week, then okay. I love my in-laws dearly, but would definitely not allow them to just demand to see my daughter whenever they wanted to if it was not convenient for us. As you can see, it's a very, very, very different type of response than you would expect if someone's actually talking about, for example, legal rights that grandparents may have, or even like moral, ethical rights that grandparents may have. And under both circumstances, I'd say it's a little bit dodgy and probably very questionable. OP replies, we see them every weekend and sometimes in the week. It's way too much. Our weekends as a family seem to revolve around his parents, mainly my mother-in-law. And that is really where I'd say that's the crux of the problem. If you feel that you as a family get zero time as your own nuclear family and you spend basically no time together, you have no weekends together because of the expectations of other family members on your time, then that's a very, very different problem than grandparents just want too much access. Of course, grandparents are generally speaking always going to be happy to see their grandkids because it's nice when you can play with kids, but then you don't have to do very much in terms of looking after them. But there are limitations to it. One person here says, I would be -1 spouse if that's the way he's acting. You need time as a nuclear family. When he chose to become a parent, his family went down on the priority list in his life. Does your family see the daughter every weekend? I have lived 5 minutes from my parents for the past 7 years. We saw them a handful of times in a month, not every weekend, not even once a week. That is too much. You basically have a custody agreement with your in-laws. Your spouse needs to remove his head from his back end here. I think that different people have very different types of relationships with their parents. I would not be okay in my family if we were super dependent on the grandparents all the time, or if they were visiting all the time. I think, honestly, there is this point when you become an adult where too much interaction with your parents just goes downhill, and it's better and healthier for you to have some good boundaries. So as a grown adult person with your own family, with your own child, with your own house, with your own job, you have a separate life, and you should learn to be responsible for that life completely independently of your parents. And then you engage with each other on this level of like as adults. You're not really talking as parent and child anymore because you're both equal adults in your relationship. And that dynamic has to be there for, in my opinion, a healthy relationship with adult children, right? Like if the relationship is not on those terms, then that's when you get into this type of conflict where you feel that one side is overbearing or is kind of like trying to make too many decisions and trying to insert themselves way too far into your life. And that's of course frustrating. It's especially frustrating for the mother here, the wife, because she's like, hey, but we have our own family. We should be spending time together, and instead of them being able to spend time together, they're sharing all of their time with the in-laws, which sounds exhausting. Now, all that said, I think that people really exaggerate very quickly when they're like, okay, I would get rid of my husband if this was the case. I don't think that you need to be quite so intense about it, but I do think that there needs to be a conversation there in terms of what does he perceive the grandparents' role in his life, in their son's life, or their daughter's life, even in their daughter's life, and what exactly they're aiming for. Like, why do the grandparents need to see them 3-4 times a week? That's quite a lot. Next comment says, why do you feel like your parents get full access to our child? Is that how it was with your grandparents? He needs to give you real reasons that this should be a thing, or understand that it's ridiculous and you don't have shared rights to your child with them. And OP replies, good response. I wish I had thought of that tonight. He invited them over tonight without telling me, even though we're seeing them tomorrow, and saw them last Sunday, and we'll probably see them Christmas Day for an hour or so, because he'll say that mother-in-law needs to see our daughter on Christmas Day. And there you see the fundamental problem that always comes up, especially with in-laws, is when the married couple does not have a shared understanding of how often they want to see the in-laws, what's reasonable. Like, is it okay to just invite them over without asking the wife, without even telling the wife? These are not quite, I wouldn't say that they're pretty fundamental, but in terms of just having a nice, healthy, happy home and not getting into fights with each other, then you kind of need a little bit of respect towards each other and a little bit of negotiation as well. Like, you can't just go into it with, I can do whatever I want. And it seems a little bit like the husband in this case is just making unilateral decisions about the child's interactions and relationship with the grandmother, with the grandparents as well, but especially the grandmother. And for whatever reason, he just does not take his wife's opinion seriously here. And there is this point when you move on from a relationship, or you move on, when you get married, what happens is that suddenly you are no longer a member of your parents' family. You now have your own little nuclear family that you're building, and that's where your primary focus and your priority should be. And when that is not there, then the wife is always going to feel a little bit unwanted, not taken seriously, kind of the secondary to the primary concern that you have, which is with your mother in that case. You can see here some examples of what that looks like in practice. This person replies, of course, when the parents say, grandparents can always ask, but parents can say no. I'm still trying to get my in-laws to understand this. And then OP replies, yes, my spouse can't say no because God forbid he hurts his mother's feelings. His exact words tonight were, what child wants to hurt his mother's feelings? He's 30 years old, by the way. His mother doesn't care about his feelings. When she cancels on us, it baffles me, but obviously I'm the crazy one. And then the reply that she gets from the forum is, tell him he needs to learn to say no to anyone and everyone so he can model that to your kids. Would he want your kids to be unable to say no to people? So you both need to model healthy boundaries so your kids can learn that it's okay to say no and do what's best for them, even if it disappoints others. Now, I think that fundamentally that's a good lesson to teach them. I wouldn't necessarily say you should put restrictions on your relationship with your parents in order to teach your kids what healthy boundaries look like. I think you can teach your kids what healthy boundaries look like without that. But I think the fundamental argument here is what are they missing out on as a family? What else would they be doing with their time if they weren't tied to the grandparents all the time? And to what extent does having to see the grandparents so often reduce the kind of, I guess, lessen their relationship because they just can't spend enough time together? And as a family, they also don't spend all that much time. OP says, you're right, his mom is controlling, but he's to blame too. He thinks that he should be able to take our daughter without me to see his mom. And yes, he's right that he should be able to, but I feel uncomfortable about it because I see her so much already. And then this is the point at which I felt a little bit like OP is kind of just being a little bit unreasonable. Honestly, if I didn't want to spend a ton of time with grandparents and my in-laws still want to see my kid, and my husband is also up for taking him, that I would personally just be like, yeah, sure, you can go hang out. I think that she is struggling to set boundaries with them because the husband doesn't agree with her. And then instead of being reasonable about how to try to get on the same page with the husband, she's kind of vetoing him doing things with the son, or with the daughter. Sorry, I keep misspeaking there. With the daughter. And that's not very fair either. The final comment that I wanted to read out here is this one. She says, I thought this post was a court-based grandparent rights based off the title. My fingers were ready to go. I'm currently being sued by my child's parental grandmother, I guess she means paternal grandmother, for visitation rights. She's held him one time for less than a minute. So yeah. Going off that, absolutely no one is entitled to time with your child. Being a grandparent is a privilege, not a right. Nuclear family time should always come first. I mean, if you're miserable, then the nuclear family is going to suffer. I wouldn't even spend once a month with my mother-in-law. I would rather die. If your husband wants to spend so much time with them, then he can go while you and your daughter make other plans. My child is not an emotional support animal for people that need to see them. My child has relationships with healthy individuals. I don't believe anyone gets to decide to see someone else's child. This generation of grandparents is absolutely ridiculous. They feel so entitled to others' children. I mean, did they see their grandparents that much? No. I didn't have my child to have everyone else take up all the free time with them. I think this is exactly right. To kind of really summarizes this idea that being a grandparent is a privilege, it is not a right. And so in order to have good relationships with your grandchildren, you need to maintain healthy relationships with your kids as well. Unfortunately for OP, the fundamental problem that she's experiencing here is quite simply that her husband just doesn't agree. And so how do you get the husband to agree is a very, very complicated question. I would really argue for it from this angle of, hey, we should have priority as a nuclear family. There are other things that I want us to spend our time doing. And the arguments that he seems to have in terms of hurting his mother's feelings and so on, like, it should be okay to say no to seeing your mother sometimes without that hurting her feelings. Like, it sounds to me like he's a little bit too under her thumb, his mother's thumb, at this point in time. And he's already 30 years old. So he's old enough to be a grown adult man, to be able to make his own decisions. And he needs to somehow separate that a little bit. So in this case, I would argue that it is more that the husband is the weak one rather than the in-laws being the overbearing ones. Our next one is titled, Husband Thinks Women Overreact During Childbirth. I'm a week away from my due date, and I've gradually become more and more disappointed with my husband over him not wanting to be involved in my pregnancy, not doing any research, and not remembering any important details said during our doctor visits. Not only that, he hasn't shown much empathy during the times I've had uncomfortable symptoms like nausea, swelling, etc. Last night, I was watching childbirth videos on YouTube, and I decided to show the ones that I was watching to my husband. The woman in the video started crying out in pain while pushing, and my husband rolled his eyes and started laughing. He said, "That woman is obnoxious, can't be that painful, and she shouldn't be screaming." He continued to laugh at the video, and I asked why he thought it was funny, and he said, "I'm laughing because that's gonna be you." I got so upset. I tried to convince him that it can be really painful and that I feel awful knowing that if I show signs of being in pain or uncomfortable, that he's either going to think that I'm overreacting or that my suffering is laughable. He managed to turn it around and make the argument my fault. He called me a dumb and threatened to leave me last night. It's the next morning now and he refuses to apologize. He's still playing victim, and I heard him saying that he wants to shoot himself because he can't stand me. I don't know what to do. I'm a week away from my induction, and it's not like I'm in a position to leave or make any big changes or decisions right now. I definitely want to cry at the idea of him being in the delivery room with me, but of course he's my husband and he can't miss the birth of his child, but I just don't want him there with me anymore. Last thing I want is someone who won't give me the support I need. Now, obviously the husband in this situation is kind of a little bit of a dick. He's not a very nice person. He's not treating her in a very nice way. The part that he says he wants to shoot himself because he can't stand her, like these are comments that are just completely unacceptable in any type of fight in a married couple. So definitely he's way overboard here in a way that's really insulting and not good. The part with the childbirth videos, his reaction, honestly, I would say that in the majority of cases, this type of reaction is really a symptom of how removed we are as a society from the experience of birth. Breastfeeding also falls under this. You may have heard me say that before. In general, I think what's happened with us is that we just have no understanding or perception or contact with or exposure to these types of animalistic experiences that we have still. And birth is the prime example of that, where I'd argue actually it's one of the most animalistic primal experiences that a woman can, well, it's definitely the most that a woman can go through, but also one of the most that any person can go through. And it's one of those times, experiencing birth is one of those times where you realize that you're just a mammal in a lot of ways, like all the other mammals. So that he reacts in this way and that he thinks it's funny, that it seems foreign to him. I think a lot of people try to laugh things off that make them uncomfortable. And I would question if maybe he felt a little bit uncomfortable watching it. And that's part of where the reaction came from. This is obviously me reaching, like this is pure speculation. I don't know anything about him. And he does seem kind of like not the nicest of people in general. So maybe he did genuinely find it funny. But I think most people watch birth videos and feel a little bit uncomfortable. There's something about it that's just, you're just like, this is strange. And I think that comes from us just really not having experienced it or not seen it. The way that it's presented in like media, so in TV shows and things like that, it's always very sanitized. And yes, women scream a lot, but that's about it. Otherwise, you just don't get quite the nitty gritty details in the same way that you would if you were watching childbirth videos on YouTube, for example, which in my experience are a lot more real and a lot more honest about what it's like as an experience. All that said, she is, in my opinion, trying to involve him a little bit too much. So everything from that he doesn't want to be involved in her pregnancy, he doesn't do any research, he doesn't remember details during doctor visits. Empathy does sound like a bit of a problem, but I guess that depends on how that manifests itself. In general, it sounds to me like she's experiencing this maybe for the first time, and it's a really big deal, and it really consumes you actually, especially during early pregnancy and late pregnancy. I say those two periods. You really invest a lot of energy and time just kind of educating yourself about what pregnancy looks like. At least I did. And especially the first few weeks after I found out that I was pregnant, I felt like I just consumed a lot of content around pregnancy. So I would have an idea of what to expect and how the experience would be for me. And I also had a similar experience in terms of, obviously my husband didn't do any of that because to him it's a very, like, why would he need to? When it comes to things like important details, like, yes, I would tell him something and then a couple of weeks later I tell him the same thing again because he'd forget it. So it's normal to me that men just don't have that same connection to pregnancy that women have, of course, because women are going through it, whereas men are not. So that part, I honestly wouldn't have been too annoyed at him for it. I think I showed my husband only childbirth videos that I felt were a little bit funny. Otherwise, I watched a lot of birthing videos all by myself, and I didn't involve him in that either. And honestly, I think that that's just part of, like, I don't know that very many men are super interested in what birth looks like as an experience. Traditionally, birth used to be something that only women were involved in, so men wouldn't even be in the room when it happened. They would come in after the baby was born. And not that I'm saying that men shouldn't be present during the birth of their child, because I think that's actually really awesome when they're there. But I just think that maybe this is part, like, just not understanding the disconnect that men go through, I think is part of the conflict that might happen if this is an expectation that you have in your relationship and you're finding that your spouse is just really not that interested. I'd say that this is pretty normal. There's that part to it, and then the rest of it, I think, is just clear that he was not a very good partner throughout that argument. She does say that my impression is that the argument really exploded and went completely out of bounds. So when she says, I got so upset, she tried to convince him that it can be really painful. And then she just jumps to, he managed to turn it around and make the argument my fault. He threatened to leave me last night. Like, that sounds to me like there was a very big gap between those two events, that something happened there in the argument where it completely escalated. All that said, I don't think that threatening to leave is ever acceptable in an argument. And I think statements like he wants to shoot himself are also completely out of line. This is not... I think it's hard for people to learn how to argue with each other when they're married, and there is a temptation to look for the thing to say that's going to be the most hurtful and the most emotional, and just kind of get out your anger and to, like, dig it into the other person. And obviously, this is not great for a marriage in general. I think one of the good things to keep in mind is to try to only say things that you actually truly deeply mean, and not only mean in the moment, but that when you're not so angry anymore and you're not so pissed off, you're still going to mean it. The things that you can stand behind. And then usually statements like this are ones that people just regret after the fact. So maybe don't say things that you're going to regret, or that make you look like a terrible person, or that have the risk of escalating a situation beyond the point that you want. All that said, I would probably choose to not have him present at my birth. When it comes to my particular birth and my personal experience of it, I essentially told my husband exactly what I wanted him to do. I had very specific expectations towards him. And yeah, I think that we agreed on these things in advance. In general, I think that giving birth makes you very vulnerable as a woman. And yes, you should have a support person present, but that should be someone that you absolutely trust, that can advocate for you as needed, that will not make you feel uncomfortable. Like, giving birth is one of the most freeing in some ways, because you just don't have the energy to care about being self-conscious in any way whatsoever. And so if you have someone there who makes you feel self-conscious on top of the experience of birth already, which is a really intense one, then that's not going to be good for you. You want to remove any sources of stress from your immediate vicinity when you're giving birth, because the more stressed you are, the more painful of a birth you're going to have. So I would probably not have him present at the birth, and yeah, like maybe he would be able, like we'd be able to resolve the argument afterwards, and maybe he would apologize, and I'd be like, yeah, okay, you know, I can let it go, and we'll give it a shot. And then I would still probably tell my midwife or whatever, hey, if he says A, B, C, D, or if it seems like I'm uncomfortable, please, can you make sure that I get my space? And I think that would actually be quite fair. I would even tell him that directly as well, because there are these moments in life, and birth is one of those, that you just have to treat as though they're very sacred and they're very special. And if you treat them that way, then chances are you're going to have a better birth than otherwise. So yeah, really tough situation, really tough circumstance. I feel absolutely sorry for her. Now, the comments are a ton of people who go on, just hop on about how extremely painful birth is, and all the different ways that you can convince him that birth is the most painful thing that you could ever. So this comment says, childbirth is the equivalent of breaking 26 bones at once. So break 26 of his bones and see if he's obnoxious. Both times I gave birth, my husband sobbed due to the pain that I was in, and I had fantastic epidurals. Honestly, leave him. He's a loser. I would say, if you can't stand me, then go. I don't need you. Now, I don't know where this statement comes from in terms of birth is the equivalent of breaking 26 bones at once. I found it extremely difficult to describe what giving birth is like, especially, you know, people would say, okay, well, what is it like breaking a bone? And honestly, I don't think it's anything like any other type of pain that you might experience. So this is just not where I would go in order to help this woman, because I don't think that that's very helpful. But there we are. This person says, girl, if my husband acted like that, my midwife would have knocked him out before I could. Honestly, if he acts like that in the delivery room, your provider might kick him out anyways. Take him right out of the equation. No support is better than negativity. Tell him you'd like to kick him in the balls 10 times in a row, and then he can tell you it's not painful. Then she talks about getting an epidural. And OP replies to this. She says, thank you. It's nice of you to say. I'll try my best to stay positive. Before, during, and after. It's nice to know that my provider could make him leave if he starts behaving this way, but honestly, I know that he won't. He's very good at playing the perfect husband when people are around. He's only like this when it's just us. And it's funny that you said to tell him I'd want to kick him in the balls 10 times in a row and see if that hurts. He's totally one of those guys that say getting kicked in the balls once is the equivalent or worse than childbirth. This part I just wanted to highlight in terms of when she says he's very good at playing the perfect husband when people are around, and he's only like this when it's just us. That's actually a huge red flag. That's quite terrifying. People who behave in a completely different way when they're around other people versus how they behave in their relationship are, generally speaking, let's say, highly likely to be abusive, at the very least emotionally abusive in some kind of way. So this is quite scary to me. This would say to me that I really don't want him present, because I wouldn't be able to trust him when I'm with him, because he behaves as if he's a different person, and that's quite terrifying. Another comment from this thread that I wanted to read out, she says, honestly, I agree with the majority stating that he should be out of the delivery room. However, I would literally have a conversation with him saying that because you're acting like crap and cannot support me in my most vulnerable state of giving birth to your child, you will not be there. Furthermore, I do not know if I want to be with you, seeing that you lack empathy and fail to recognize something so big that I'm going through or about to go through. I do not know what has caused you to have such a messed up perspective of reality, but you clearly need help. Seeing as I am almost near my labor, I cannot make any life-changing decisions right now. After the baby is born, I will have to address the continuation of our relationship. Now, beyond the fact that it's kind of hilarious how formal she wrote this, I will have to address the continuation of our relationship. I think that you should actually sit down and have a serious conversation about it. There are some times when men, I think, make jokes at times that are just completely inappropriate. And for example, during birth is one of those times. I think my husband said something about how he would make some type of joke while I was giving birth. And I was like, no, it's just not the right time. Okay. There's a time and place for everything. This is not the right time for that. But But I don't know that I would say, hey, let's throw away the whole relationship on the basis of this one argument. On the basis of everything else, like if it's normal for him to treat her like crap in person and then act like a completely different person around other people, if it's normal for him to say things like, I would rather shoot myself than be with you, if these are, if this was not an isolated event, but characteristic of their relationship, then you have really serious major problems in your relationship. And I would hope that most people who have that kind of experience can recognize that this is not normal. This is not what a relationship should look like. This is not what arguments should look like, and can act accordingly based on that knowledge. OP replies to this one. She says, thank you for the comment and what you suggested. I hope I'll be able to address everything without him tuning me out and just waiting for his turn to speak. He did apologize today, but he also said that he just thinks the woman was being obnoxious. If I screamed out in pain, that he wouldn't laugh at me. It doesn't make sense to me, but it somehow does to him. That actually does kind of make a bit of sense to me. I think that having empathy to someone that you actually know and care about, and have a relationship with, is very different from having empathy for someone else. And sometimes, like I said, I showed birth videos to my husband that I thought were funny because I thought that the people present, not the woman giving birth, but the people present helping her, said things that just completely... I just thought they were really awkward and sounded terrible, and I was like, you're not allowed to say anything like this to me, otherwise it would drive me crazy. So to some element I understand seeing a video and being like, what an obnoxious human being, and saying that you would treat your wife differently to that. All that said, it still sounds very red flaggy, so who knows. In general, I think that, like, to summarize, this idea that men are equally as interested in pregnancy and birth as women are is just a lie, and just don't convince yourself of that. Your husband is never going to have the same level of interest as you do, and therefore, it's fine to share, of course, and you want to share most things that go on in your life, but it's also okay to not expect him to be super hyper enthusiastic about it all the time. Don't laugh at people who are giving birth. That's not cool. And maybe don't laugh at people who are giving birth right before your wife is about to give birth either. That's like doubly not cool. Saying specific things during arguments is completely out of line, and you should control that. And my final point is, watch out for red flags in your relationship. If you feel like you're being treated badly, and that's a really genuine feeling, then you need some kind of, like, that's really something that you need to work through somehow productively, rather than trying to excuse things in your head and let it go. Some statements are just absolutely no-goes in a relationship. Our next one is titled, I'm going to come kidnap him. My in-laws are on their annual beach vacation. My husband FaceTimed in to wish his dad a happy Father's Day. Sister-in-law called to my son from the background and said that they wanted my son to come with them next year. My mother-in-law then said to my husband, which I feel was aimed at me, there's going to come a time when you realize you don't have as much control as you think you do. One day I'm going to come over and grab him and kidnap him. Then she laughed to try and pass it off as a joke in that passive-aggressive way that she always does. I was sitting on the couch nearby, not on the call, and when she said that, I started kicking my husband's foot so that he could set her straight, and of course he said nothing. So over her pushing and inappropriateness and over my husband letting her slide. Who says that to a parent? I'm pissed. It is a pretty creepy joke. Now, I do think that a lot of people make jokes just in bad taste. And sometimes people just don't have a filter. They don't think of how the thing that they're going to say is going to come across as. And it just is terrible. It just is not a good joke. It's not funny at all. That one is a little bit awkward. I would probably not make a huge deal out of it because I would not seriously think that she means to kidnap him. And I wouldn't do this thing where if my husband was talking to his mum and she said something that I didn't like, where I'd kick his foot to try and convince him to talk to her. I don't think that that's very cool either. I think it's normal to have a different knee-jerk response to things than the husband does. I think afterwards I would have probably said to him, hey, you know what? I didn't find that very funny. If she's making jokes like that a lot, please talk to her. And then I would have let it go, and that would have been the end of it. So yeah, not the funniest of jokes, but I probably wouldn't take it so seriously that it really, ruins my day and I go around in my life being super angry about it. This person replies, my loony mother-in-law literally said the same thing to me as soon as my baby was born. She said, I'm going to come and steal her away in the middle of the night. I was postpartum and this made me so anxious. When I told my husband, he just said, oh, come on, she's just kidding. She doesn't have the best sense of humor, so it came out awkward because she's so excited. And someone actually replies to this and says, my mother-in-law gave me such anxiety with those comments. I still get anxious when trying to sleep at night that my mother-in-law will actually try it. As my boyfriend says, she's gotten weird with old age. It creeps me out. Now, I truly believe this is a little bit over the top. I know that it's possible to have in-laws who genuinely would kidnap your kids if they could. I understand that that might be a risk, but I think you would know that they're that insane. I don't know. When I read these, my knee-jerk says in-laws sometimes make terrible jokes, and it's clear that when she says I was postpartum and this gave me anxiety, that it was on the woman's end that the anxiety was super high already, and then you fixate on a particular comment and it makes you really spiral, and then you start imagining all these scenarios in your head and blah blah blah. Like, it just goes on from there. So that's kind of what I feel is happening here. I know that there are actually, I hope, very few cases of in-laws trying to steal the kids away, but that's pretty scary. This person replies, yeah, that whole, you don't have as much control as you think you do. What? Yes, you do. She thinks that you'll just notice your baby missing and not do anything about it. I actually think this is what most of them think. They would be like, oh, well, they must be with mother-in-law. It's fine. You know, mother-in-law, comments like that do nothing for increasing your odds of being allowed to take her on trips like this. Of course, we have complete control over her. I don't know what you're talking about. Mine made a joke about kidnapping my daughter and how I'd have to catch them or wait until they were ready to bring her back. She's also made comments about supporting grandparents who actually kidnap their grandkids. I joked back that, nah, I just called the police. They'd get to you faster and they take kidnapping pretty seriously. Apparently, that wasn't funny. This sounds like such a terrible conversation to me all the way around. Like, I don't know why you can't just say, hey, you know what? I don't find that very funny. Let's not talk about this and just change the subject, talk about something else. I think responding with a threat kind of just makes the situation escalate. And then again, you fixate, like you stay stuck on this conversation when it's not like, yes, it's in bad taste and yes, it's terrible. And please, in-laws, don't say things like this to people. It just makes them real uncomfortable. But yeah, I wouldn't try and pick a fight over it. This person says, oh, wow, I'm so annoyed for you. My in-laws say stuff like this all the time. My father-in-law, when I was pregnant, would say, your son is going to love us more than you guys, and he's never going to want to come home to you after being here. I would get so mad. I don't know why people get off thinking these types of comments are normal or appropriate. That I would actually take that way more seriously. Anything along the lines of, hey, he doesn't like you, or I'm going to make him love me more. These are the types of statements that I think you can only say to someone because you want to piss them off. It just does not seem at all natural or normal to me in the space of a normal conversation that you would come up with something like that. So there I would probably try and shut that down and say, come on, that's really not cool. Let's not do this. Yeah, and so sometimes jokes are in bad taste. I think it's okay to not find them funny, and it's okay to be a little bit annoyed by them. I would probably just say that in the moment if it was said to me. If it's said to your husband and he doesn't care, then I would tell him afterwards, just, hey, by the way, I didn't think that was a really cool, funny joke that she made there. And generally speaking, I would let it go. If it became repetitive, so if it was something that she said over and over and over again, then I would probably sit down with her and have an actual conversation about it and say, look, I know you think that this is funny, and I know you only say this to make a point about how much you want to spend time with him, but I don't find it all that funny. It preys on my anxiety as a parent in terms of something bad happening to my child being taken away from me. These are the types of scenarios that come in my head when you start talking like that. And obviously that's not conducive for us to have, it's just not for us to have a good time. The outcome is a negative one. And then chances are most reasonable people will be like, yeah, okay, fair enough. And you can both move on with your life. I think it's okay to just have these conversations about these events when they annoy you, without going like, oh my God, I'm just so angry. The time that it takes from going, okay, that was kind of not cool, I want to talk about it, to I'm absolutely livid and I want to stop your parents from seeing my child. That should be a long time coming, right? There should be a spectrum there. And that first end, if you start off there, then try and stay there for as long as possible before you default to doing really terrible things, and properly breaking apart relationships and so on. The next one is titled Spouse Against Breastfeeding. Is anyone else having this problem with their significant other? My husband has a major stigma towards breastfeeding, and I have absolutely no idea why. With our first, I would be literally in the middle of breastfeeding, and he would come up to us with a bottle of formula in hand to feed him. I would pump as well and have breast milk ready to go, and he would make formula for him. It drove me nuts, and I am sure it did not help my supply since I eventually dried up about 2 months postpartum. Fast forward to now, I'm 9 months pregnant, there's a formula shortage, I've been out to various stores trying to stock up on formula, but I've had a really difficult time finding any. I told him that I was to start pumping immediately after birth and freeze it while baby is sleeping, and even try breastfeeding our 1-year-old again so that I can keep up my supply as much as possible. He told me that breastfeeding and having breast milk on supply isn't necessary because the shortage will not last through next month. He's not saying it, but just based on his behavior and attitude from before, I know he's really saying that he doesn't want me to breastfeed. Again, I don't understand why, and I don't want to ask why. I personally do not see the problem with breastfeeding or even just pumping and bottle feeding it, but he does for some reason. So again, is anyone else having this issue with their significant other? Do you have any advice? I've told him directly and firmly that I'm going to breastfeed and pump, but I know he's still going to try and feed the baby formula anyway, ultimately making me stress and dry up again. Please help. I always think that people just get stuck on the wrong problem. So the problem here is it has nothing to do with breastfeeding, actually. You can try and have a rational conversation about breastfeeding and why breastfeeding is good and blah, blah, blah. Try and make it a parental decision that both of you make together, and then you move on from there. That's the breastfeeding argument and the debate that you can have about it. What is a problem here, and it's so unbelievably clear in what she says, she doesn't even know why he has a problem. He's not even including, like, it's not that there's no conversation about it. It's not that he's sitting there and going, hey, you know what? I don't think you should breastfeed for these and these and these reasons. So I'm going to try and get hold of formula, or I want us to try and get hold of formula, and maybe we can formula feed instead. The idea of having a second child with this person without ever having had that conversation, like if you're literally sitting there and you're breastfeeding your baby and then he's coming over with a bottle of formula to shove in his face instead, I would be like, hey, what the hell? Why are you doing this? What's your problem? What's going on? And I think that this is pretty normal. I think that that's the minimum that you should be able to expect in a marriage and in a relationship. I don't get this as a problem at all. Some part of me finds it actually quite comical to imagine that you're like, hey, okay, I'm going to breastfeed my child. And then the husband doesn't even say anything to you. But behind your back, he goes and he gets bottles and he gets formula. And then he tries to feed the child formula. God. Honestly, the state of marriages today just, I say today, maybe marriages were always like this, what people always is crazy. It's completely insane to me. Then she says, I don't even want to ask why. So not only is she like, I have no idea what's going on here, she does not even have the willingness to try and actually resolve the situation by talking to him about it and trying to agree on something. So basically, as far as I'm concerned, this is just completely untenable as a scenario. To me, the only way you can move forward from here is she basically sneaks the child away and nurses him in a room by herself and then spends as much time there as possible. And she tries to separate him from his dad because she can parent him in the way that she wants. And that's a terrible precedent. You don't want to have that for your kids. The only way you cannot have that for your kids is if you're able to have adult conversations with each other and actually agree and make decisions together. And then the fact that she's not even trying drives me crazy, completely insane. Basically, 100% of the comments say, why can't you talk to him? Here's an example. She says, this man likely has a reason for feeling this way, and it sounds like he may need a therapist. The formula shortage and supply chain issues are going to persist, so if you need or want to formula feed, it's a challenge. But if you don't want to, then why subject yourself to that extra stress? My husband is all for breastfeeding, but he doesn't like handling it unless it's in a bottle because it's gross. He makes it seem like I'm handing him a bag of pee. I remind him that the milk he drinks is literally from an animal and it's no different than what I'm doing, just processed and further removed from the source. Now, we're going to go on a tangent here, but fundamentally, yes, there must be a reason that he's behaving in this way. And as his wife, you have a right to know what that reason is. And if you're making decisions, I actually do think that a lot of people will say things like the decision to breastfeed is only the mother's decision. And yeah, I guess if she's choosing to breastfeed, but I think that there should be an agreement philosophically about whether breastfeeding is the right way to feed your child or not. So if you have an actual preference for formula feeding for whatever reason that may be, then this is something that you need to talk to each other about. And if you have an actual preference for breastfeeding, then as a couple, you should also be on the same page with regards to that. And then whether it works out, whether the mother's able to, whether she decides that she can't really get into it, she wants to do something else, if it's painful, etc., like all the other things that could happen around that, then fair enough. You can say this is primarily the mother's role to then decide, but fundamentally for a marriage to succeed, you guys have to be able to talk to each other. So if you can't talk to each other, then you have a fundamental problem. Yeah, to go on a very separate tangent, this idea that he thinks it's disgusting that she produces milk and then he can only handle it if it's in a plastic bag and then he holds it like it's a bag of pee is just awful. This again harkens to the point that I was making earlier about just how far removed we are from nature, from how things happen. If he had ever milked a cow and drank the milk straight from the cow, then he would have a very different perception, a very different understanding of where milk comes from and what milk is. And then you wouldn't have this sense of disgust when it comes to breast milk or human milk. Like, this is just awful, completely horrendous. And then what one person replies to this, she says, isn't it crazy that cow's milk is more accepted than mother's milk? How is there not a period in history that is known for when mothers were the milk providers of the family? It's almost unbelievable to me that cow's milk was always what we drank. Sounds like milk farmers are really just good at marketing. Now, there's a lot of lack of knowledge in this statement, which is fundamentally that women cannot produce anywhere near as much milk as a cow does. And again, this is just someone who has never seen a cow, who has any idea how much cows produce and so on. And I say this as someone, I've never milked a cow myself, but we did used to drink cow milk fresh from cows as kids. And so, yeah, no, it's not that milk farmers are just amazing at marketing. It's really just that breast milk is a precious, precious resource. We barely have enough for babies. Yeah. All of humanity cannot survive off of drinking breast milk. That would be insane. So this is why we drink cow's milk instead. So yes, that is that aspect to it. Another comment that I wanted to read is from this one. OP replies after all of these people saying, hey, why can't you just talk to each other? You need to sit down and have a normal conversation. You need to find out why he's against it so you can convince him to not be against it. Here are all these sources of all the data about how amazing breast milk is. And then OP replies, and she says, thank you for all your support. Some of you are asking why I cannot talk to him about it. And honestly, he's hard to talk to about anything that he disagrees with. He's highly opinionated, and whether or not I give him substantiated evidence that proves him wrong, he will still continue to believe that he is right. It's really not worth the fight on some things, you know? It's definitely a big problem in our marriage. I will take all of your advice though and tell him that there's no formula allowed in the house and see how he feels about it. And yes, as one of you pointed out, I think he is controlling as well. Yikes. Like, that's pretty awful. This idea of, yeah, he's so opinionated. It doesn't matter if I provide him with any evidence. It's not even a question of evidence. It's just also fundamentally a question of being able to sit down and talk when you disagree. And then she says, it's not worth the fight on some things, you know. I kind of get that. I get the point of saying, okay, pick the battle. You do not need to die on every hill. But breastfeeding is a pretty big hill. Like, how you feed your baby, that's a pretty big hill to die on. Like, that's not one of those circumstances where I'd be like, yeah, okay, we don't need to fight it out. It's fine. It's not a big deal. I can just do what I want. So fundamentally, the summary here is that sometimes all of these problems that people experience come from fundamental issues that they have within the marriage itself. And the solution is you need to fix the marriage problem. It is not one of those cases where you can just circumvent it by doing something else or focusing on something else and then say, okay, you know what, if I fix the breastfeeding thing, then we're fine. because it's not about that. It's about the fact that you can't talk to each other. So you need to learn a way to talk to each other. And I don't know how you do that if you say, yeah, he's controlling and he doesn't care what my opinion is and he's opinionated no matter what. Like, he just has his ways and he thinks in that way. Like, that does not seem, I don't understand how you, number one, marry this person, and number two, choose to have 2 kids with them. Like, how did you get through child 1 without ever having that conversation? I don't know. So either way, try to set yourself a really good foundation and to have a really good relationship before you bring kids into it, and you will have a much, much easier time. Our next one is titled Overbearing Stepmom, or Am I Overthinking This? My stepmom has been nothing but helpful throughout my pregnancy, and even now that my baby is here. But now it's starting to become a little concerning with how she sees my son. Maybe I'm just looking too deep into this. So about a week back, my dad, stepmom, grandma, stepsister, and little brother all came over to visit and see my baby, which is fine. I have no issue with family visiting. However, a little into the visit, my dad was holding my baby and decided to pass him to my stepmom, which she then said as she's holding him, "Oh, do you see daddy?" with my dad sitting next to her. Then she quickly changed her wording to granddad. You could probably imagine my shock when I heard that, to which I looked at my dad and he looked extremely uncomfortable when she called him that, but he didn't say anything. In fact, no one did. This made me extremely upset, and I don't want it to come down to me having to limit visitations or straight up tell her where her place is in the family if she does something like that again. But I don't know. Maybe I'm overreacting. What does one do in a situation like this? Oh my God. Okay. So sometimes people misspeak, you know? Sometimes people want to say something and then they say something else and it's a mistake. They didn't mean to. And then everyone moves on because they understand that they just misspoke and it's not a big deal. I think that this issue with people calling, for example, if mother-in-laws want to be called mum or mama or mummy or whatever it is, same with granddads when that comes out. I think the primary problem is when people intend it and when they act or behave in a way that makes it seem as if they're trying to usurp the role of the mother or the dad or whatever. This is very, very different from just an accident. So for example, if you have always only been a parent and now suddenly you're a grandparent, it takes a bit of time for you to start thinking of yourself as a grandparent, right? Because you're used to the terms mom and dad in interacting with you. And it's still like that's all there is to it. Sometimes it just takes a while for your brain to catch up. Sometimes you just say something and it comes out on autopilot and it's the wrong thing for whatever reason. It is 100% overreacting. The fact that her brain immediately went to, I need to limit visits and tell her where her place in the family is. Like, that's insane. That's insane. I don't understand why people just jump to the worst possible interpretation of something before, like, just why'd you do this to yourself? You could have had a much easier time if you just heard this and then you just let it go and you were like, oh, it was just an accident, it was a mistake. She immediately corrects herself based on your own retelling of the story. Everyone understood that she was correcting herself and everyone moved on, and that's all there is to it. To be extremely upset by that makes you a little bit childish and a little bit irrational. And you can see 100% of the comments, which is extremely rare for this forum actually, 100% of the comments are also like, you're overreacting. This person says, this will happen 500 times. They're used to being parents, not grandparents. I couldn't imagine limiting visits for such a silly mistake. Yikes. One day you'll call your own kid the wrong name. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't have time with him or her anymore. And the next one says, this sounds like a huge overreaction. I misspeak all the time out of just talking fast. I can't remember specific situations, but I know for a fact that it's happened for sure. You just correct yourself and move on. I don't think this is anything to get upset over unless she was actually being weird and referring to them as mom and dad in private. And the third one, I personally have accidentally referenced my dad as dad to my daughter because that's just how I'm used to referring to him. If they have younger children still at home, it's likely that she says that a lot when referring to him. Very simple casual slip that literally means nothing. What are you even insinuating? Like the previous poster said, you will do this yourself a million times over, so just take it easy. Sometimes you read comments and then you're like, oh, look, that's nice. People are reasonable. People have good, reasonable responses to some situations. Now, this is what I find really funny. She says, sounds like it was a slip. I've called my baby my dog's name and said all sorts of weird things. It doesn't mean anything other than I'm tired. And I have also sometimes called my baby my dog's name, usually when I'm annoyed, because I'm so used to calling out my dog's name when I'm annoyed. So this just happens to people sometimes, and it's okay. I don't know why. I understand that under very many circumstances, it's hard to identify whether in-laws are being overbearing or not. But if you are in the middle, if you're on the fence, you're like, hey, maybe I'm overthinking it, then chances are 9.9 out of 10 times you are probably overthinking it. And your response should be, if I think I'm overthinking it, I can just not care. I can move on with my life and it's not going to matter. And so we come to the final thread of the day, which is titled, Is it ever okay to break up over text? I've been dating someone for about 3 months. Is breaking up over text ever okay or acceptable? This person is non-violent. However, they have an addiction problem. He lives over an hour away and we've only talked on the phone 2 times. We text daily. He's a nice man, just drinks way too much. Can I break up over text or am I being a coward? Honesty is welcomed. Thanks. Now, I don't have a ton of experience with this, but I do fundamentally believe that if you want to break up over text, that makes you a coward. If you have enough of a relationship with someone, that you're meeting up with them, that you're interacting with them, that you consider it to be dating, then it's only polite to just say, hey, look, I'm not interested in continuing the relationship. I'm sorry. And that's it. You know, you pay for the coffee and you leave. Like, it's a pretty simple interaction. It does not need to be the end of the world. I don't know how you ever expect to be able to get to a point in your life where you are confident and able to state your opinions and just, you know, have a bit of self-esteem if you cannot handle these types of reactions, these types of conversations face to face. I understand why. There's a lot of literature out there about how women tend to be more agreeable than men, and you don't want to hurt people's feelings and you don't want to deal with the fallout. Like, I understand why. I would also struggle with it, but you have to do it. Like, that's the only way to be a normal human being, and to it gets better with practice, as all things do. So it's much better to do it in person. Not that I'm saying you need to practice breaking up with people, but disappointing people, rejecting them, dealing with fallout and fire, like if firing people is an example of what that might look like in a work setting. These are all interactions that sometimes you just have to get through them, and there's no other way. And I think doing it over text means that you cannot be bothered giving the other person, like you just don't respect the other person, and you can't be bothered investing any time or energy into that. And that's just makes you out to be the worst person in the relationship, which sucks. That's my opinion. Some people do agree. This person says it's not the most respectful thing in the world, and it's kind of a cop-out to confronting an uncomfortable situation. You owe him the respect to do it in person if that's how you've been seeing him. If your relationship has been mainly text, then that's the only way I'd see it as acceptable. If you've just had a phone relationship, then that seems like the trend that you'd follow. I wouldn't even consider that a relationship. Seems just like conversation. And then the next person says, for 3 months, depends on how serious it was. I think it's okay. Next time he proposes a plan, just say that this is not working. So halfway ghosting, halfway breaking up. I think only the very serious relationships get the we need to talk. Again, this depends on how serious you guys were. And then someone replies to this, half ghosting, halfway breaking up is top tier. This is how I prefer ending things. I start to ghost, pull away. Some are able to get the hint and no further explanation is required. And honestly, that's just cowardly. That's really just cowardly. It makes me sad for all the people who experience this. I don't know why you can't just be upfront and direct. OP does say here that she gives a little bit more context. She says, we've met about once a week and have been romantic. I think I have to do it voice to voice. It's just hard being like, I want to break up because of how much you drink and use drugs, but I feel like I should be honest. It's just so much easier to send a goodbye text. Now, if you already know that you want to take the easy way out, then that's your brain telling you you're being a coward, because the easy way out is usually the cowardly way out. If you already know that this is not the right way, but you know what, it's going to be a lot less stressful for me if I do it this way, then those are exactly the times where you should be doing the thing that you know is going to be stressful, because that's how you build enough fortitude over time that you can be the type of person that you want to be and kind of engage with people in the way that you think is right to engage with them without compromising on that. I actually think it's a pretty fair reason to break up with someone. And I don't think it's mean to be like, yeah, I'm sorry. You seem like a nice person and I'd be interested in going out with you, but honestly, the drinks and the drugs are just not for me. And that's it. You know, maybe you will be giving him the kick that he needs in order to be able to quit these things and become a better person. And that's ultimately better for everyone. One person here says it totally depends on your relationship. My husband and I were almost engaged by 3 months. If you guys are exchanging I love yous, met each other's families, have other signs of seriousness, then call him at the very least, but preferably in person. If you've just been kind of hanging out and enjoying time together, or more like a repetitive weekend hookup, text or call will be fine. Now, based on OP's description, I really think it's better to just meet up and talk it out, and it's not a problem. That is the most respectful way to deal with the situation, and that's better for all people. Thank you so much for listening today. If you have any comments, feel free to leave a comment down below. Feel free to also like the video or share it with your friends if you're interested, and subscribe if you're interested in more similar content. I will see you next time.